The hegemony's tribunal ship, Inevitable Justice, made the kind of dramatic entrance that lesser civilizations found impressive. Reality twisted like taffy, space folded with mathematical precision, and antimatter engines sang their death song across 3 dimensions. What they hadn't anticipated was Station Kepler 442b's automated response. Welcome to Research Station Kepler 442b. Please note that all visitors must complete Form 27B for biological contamination screening. Current wait time is approximately 4 hours. Thank you for choosing human hospitality. Tribune Vex Kalar, whose species had conquered 17 star systems before breakfast on most days, stared at the cheerful hologram, with the particular expression reserved for moments when the universe revealed new depths of absurdity. AI construct, his voice carried the weight of cosmic authority. We are here under Hegemony Mandate 77 Alpha. Produce Dr. Elena Vasquez immediately for crimes against the natural order. The holographic receptionist, designed to look reassuringly human, but managing only to achieve uncanny valley with a smile, tilted its head with programmed concern. Oh dear, Dr. Vasquez is currently in her laboratory conducting her morning coffee preparation ritual. Station protocol strictly prohibits interruptions during this time. Perhaps you'd like to schedule an appointment? Vex Kalar's 3 hearts performed what could generously be called synchronized arrhythmia. Behind him, adjudicator Thresh 9 Prime's crystalline form flickered with colors that roughly translated to bureaucratic homicide. Morning coffee ritual? Thresh 9 Prime's voice sounded like mathematics having an anxiety attack. We're here to prevent the unraveling of causality itself, and you're concerned about beverage preparation? Station policy is quite clear, the AI replied with the particular brand of helpfulness that made sentients across the galaxy question their life choices. Dr. Vasquez instituted the protocol after the incident. All staff learned not to disturb her coffee time after Ensign Martinez tried to deliver urgent reports during the morning brew. Poor man developed a stutter that only manifests in prime numbers. The 3rd member of the tribunal, harmonizer Dex Vul, whose species communicated through precisely modulated pheromone clouds, released what smelled distinctly like existential dread mixed with lavender. How long does this ritual typically last? Vex Kalar asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd just realized the universe operated on different rules than he'd previously understood. 9 minutes and 37 seconds, on average. Though on Tuesdays, she adds an extra filtration step. Today's Tuesday. Thresh 9 Prime's crystalline structure rang like wind chimes in a hurricane. We gave this human 10 minutes to surrender. She's using 9 of them for coffee? Oh, she's aware of your arrival, the AI said brightly. She asked me to inform you that temporal mechanics wait for no species, but Colombian dark roast waits for no temporal mechanics. I believe that was intended as humor, though Dr. Vasquez's jokes often require advanced degrees to fully appreciate. Vex Kalar exchanged glances with his colleagues, a feat requiring considerable effort since Thresh 9 Prime didn't technically have eyes, and Dex Vul communicated through scent. The universal translator worked overtime. Perhaps, Vex Kalar said slowly, you could explain the nature of these crimes she's accused of committing. I'm afraid that's above my clearance level, the AI replied. However, I can tell you that last week's faculty meeting had to be postponed indefinitely after Dr. Vasquez presented her preliminary findings. Professor Chen locked himself in his quarters and refuses to come out until someone proves he exists. Dr. Okafor started a meditation retreat focused on the question of whether free will is a cosmic joke. And poor Dr. Reyes has been asking everyone he meets if they're absolutely certain they have individual consciousness, or if they just think they do, because thinking requires the assumption of a thinker. Harmonizer Dex Vool's pheromone cloud shifted to something resembling concerned citrus, with undertones of philosophical anxiety. The research staff has been having what they call an existential crisis, the AI continued helpfully. Though between you and me, I think humans rather enjoy questioning the fundamental nature of reality. They seem to find it invigorating. Invigorating, Vexcalar repeated flatly. Oh yes, Dr. Vasquez mentioned that doubt is humanity's favorite intellectual exercise. She compared it to your species' tendency toward ritualized combat, Tribune Vexcalar, except instead of testing physical strength, humans prefer to test whether anything they believe about existence is actually true. Thresh 9 Prime's harmonic frequency reached a pitch that made nearby coffee cups vibrate sympathetically. And this doesn't disturb them? Quite the opposite. Dr. Vasquez says humans have been doing this for millennia. Apparently, they had an entire philosophical movement dedicated to proving they couldn't prove anything. They called it skepticism and treated it as entertainment. The tribunal members processed this information with varying degrees of horror. Entertainment, Dex Vool's scent words formed something like terrified bergamot. 6 minutes remaining in the coffee ritual, the AI announced cheerfully. Would you like me to patch you through to the laboratory's security feed? Dr. Vasquez is quite methodical in her preparation. She claims the process helps her think through complex problems. Yesterday, she solved a minor paradox in quantum consciousness theory somewhere between the bean grinding and the first pour. Vexcalar realized his species' reputation for martial prowess felt distinctly less impressive when facing someone who treated existential philosophy like a morning crossword puzzle. Show us, he said. The hologram flickered, replaced by a security camera view of what appeared to be less a laboratory and more a shrine to caffeinated precision. Dr. Elena Vasquez moved through her ritual with the focused intensity of someone performing surgery on the universe itself. Every gesture was deliberate, every measurement exact. She's treating coffee preparation like a religious ceremony, Thresh 9 Prime observed. Actually, the AI interjected, she says the coffee is just coffee. But the process gives her time to consider whether the universe makes sense or whether sentient beings simply pretend it does because the alternative is too disturbing to contemplate. The tribunal watched in fascination as Elena adjusted water temperature with scientific precision. 3 minutes, 20 seconds remaining, the AI announced. I should mention that Dr. Vasquez asked me to prepare a presentation for your arrival. She anticipated you might have questions about her research methodology. She knew we were coming? Vexcalar asked. Oh yes. She calculated the probability of tribunal intervention at approximately 97.4% once her initial findings reached the hegemony's academic networks. She's quite pleased that her mathematical models proved accurate. Dex Vool's scent shifted to something resembling mint-flavored dread. Pleased? Thresh 9 Prime's harmonic oscillations approached frequencies typically associated with structural collapse. Dr. Vasquez believes that predictable behavior patterns suggest underlying logical frameworks, even in supposedly chaotic systems like galactic politics. Your arrival validates her hypothesis about institutional responses to paradigm-threatening research. The security feed showed Elena carefully measuring coffee grounds with the precision typically reserved for nuclear physics. She's using us as experimental data, Vexcalar realized. I wouldn't say using, the AI replied diplomatically. Dr. Vasquez prefers collaborative verification of theoretical models. She's very ethical about her research practices. The 3 tribunal members watched the human continue her morning ritual, each beginning to suspect they'd made a fundamental miscalculation about the nature of their quarry. Elena's coffee apparatus looked like someone had crossed a chemistry lab with a religious altar, then asked a mathematician to optimize it for aesthetic appeal. The security feed revealed layers of complexity that suggested either genius or madness, possibly both, given the human tendency to treat these concepts as interchangeable. "Observe the precision," Tribune Vex Kalar muttered, watching Elena weigh beans to the nearest tenth of a gram. "She approaches beverage creation with more care than most species approach treaty negotiations." "Treaties can be renegotiated," Adjudicator Thresh 9. Prime replied, his crystalline form resonating with what the Universal Translator interpreted as anxious chiming. "Coffee, according to human literature, is apparently sacred. I've been reviewing their cultural databases during the wait." Harmonizer Dex Vul released a pheromone cloud that smelled distinctly of vanilla-scented paranoia. "What exactly did you discover in these databases?" "Troubling correlations. Humans have fought wars over coffee beans. They've structured entire civilizations around caffeine trade routes. Most disturbing of all, they write poetry about it." The tribunal watched Elena begin what appeared to be the most elaborate brewing process in galactic history. Water temperature monitored to fractions of degrees, timing measured in precise intervals, each step documented with scientific rigor. "She's recording everything," Vex Kalar observed. "Even her coffee preparation is research data." "It gets worse," Thresh 9 Prime continued. "Human historical records show they discovered coffee approximately 1,000 years ago. Within 3 centuries, they had colonized half their planet's landmass specifically to grow more of it. They called this economics, but it appears to have been caffeine-driven territorial expansion." The AI's holographic form flickered back into view. "If I may interject, Tribune Vex Kalar, Dr. Vasquez asked me to share some background information while you wait. She thought you might appreciate understanding the full scope of her work." "Enlighten us." Dex Vul's sent words carried undertones of reluctant curiosity with notes of impending doom. Dr. Vasquez specializes in comparative consciousness studies. Her current project examines whether individual identity exists as a universal constant or as a species-specific cognitive artifact. The security feed showed Elena performing what could only be described as coffee meditation. Perfectly still, watching water drip through filters with the concentration of someone observing stellar formation. Cognitive artifact? Vex Kalar's 3 hearts attempted synchronized confusion. She theorizes that humans invented the concept of individual selfhood as a survival mechanism, then forgot it was an invention. Most fascinating is her hypothesis that other species never developed this particular delusion, which explains certain behavioral patterns across galactic civilization. Thresh 9 Prime's harmonic frequency climbed toward ranges typically associated with structural integrity warnings. What behavioral patterns? Hive minds, collective consciousness, species-wide telepathic networks, shared decision-making matrices. Dr. Vasquez suggests these aren't evolutionary adaptations, but rather the natural state of consciousness. Humans, she argues, are the aberration. The tribunal absorbed this information with varying degrees of existential discomfort. She's claiming we're normal, and they're the anomaly? Dex Vul's pheromones shifted to something resembling confused peppermint with undertones of religious crisis. More specifically, she's demonstrated that human concepts like personal responsibility, individual achievement, and private thoughts don't translate meaningfully into any other known language. The Universal Translator only works because it assumes these concepts exist universally, but her mathematical models suggest they're linguistic accidents. Elena's coffee ritual entered what appeared to be its final phase. She held the brewing apparatus with reverence typically reserved for religious artifacts or weapons of mass destruction. How does coffee preparation relate to consciousness theory? Vex Kalar asked, though part of him suspected he didn't want the answer. Dr. Vasquez claims the ritual demonstrates individual decision-making processes that most species would find incomprehensible. She chooses bean varieties, water temperatures, brewing methods, timing intervals, all personal preferences based on subjective taste experiences that she treats as meaningful. And this is unusual? Thresh 9 Prime ventured. Tribune, how do you make decisions about food preparation? Vex Kalar considered this. My species consults the collective nutritional database, cross-references optimal dietary requirements, and selects the most efficient caloric delivery system. Precisely. Dr. Vasquez makes choices based on what she calls enjoyment, a concept that requires believing individual experiences matter more than collective efficiency. The security feed showed Elena taking her first sip of coffee with an expression that could only be described as transcendent satisfaction. The tribunal watched this display of pure individualism with the fascination typically reserved for watching alien mating rituals. She's performing selfhood, Dexful observed, his scent words forming something like horrified jasmine. Exactly. And she does this every morning, as if individual preference were a fundamental force of nature rather than a psychological aberration. Thresh 9 Prime's crystalline structure vibrated with frequencies approaching panic. Her research proves that human behavior isn't just different, it's theoretically impossible. Yet demonstrably functional, the AI added helpfully. Dr. Vasquez has published 17 peer-reviewed papers on consciousness mechanics, solved 3 interstellar diplomatic crises through psychological analysis, and maintains a perfect academic record, all while believing she exists as a discrete individual entity. The tribunal contemplated this paradox while Elena finished her coffee with obvious pleasure. She's not just studying consciousness, Vex Kalar realized. She's proving that impossible things can work if you commit to them completely enough. Dr. Vasquez calls it the functionality of useful fictions. She argues that human civilization succeeds precisely because humans believe things that aren't true, then act as if those beliefs were reality. Elena set down her empty cup with ceremonial precision and began cleaning her equipment with the same methodical care she'd used in its preparation. 30 seconds until laboratory emergence, the AI announced. Dr. Vasquez asked me to mention that she's prepared a brief presentation on the philosophical implications of her research for galactic civilization. She's particularly excited to discuss her findings on collective decision-making versus individual agency. The 3 tribunal members exchanged glances that managed to convey mutual terror across species barriers. She wants to discuss her research, Thresh 9 Prime said slowly, with representatives of species whose entire social structures depend on collective consciousness. Dr. Vasquez mentioned that peer review is essential to the scientific process. She's looking forward to your perspectives on whether individual identity is a sustainable cognitive model for galactic society. Elena appeared to be finishing her ritual, moving with the satisfied air of someone who had successfully completed an impossibly complex task that nobody else understood the necessity of. We came here to arrest a war criminal, Vex Kalar muttered. Instead, we're about to receive a lecture on why we might not actually exist as individuals. Dr. Elena Vasquez emerged from her laboratory, carrying her coffee cup like a weapon of philosophical mass destruction. She was smaller than the tribunal had expected. Humans often were, but possessed the particular brand of confidence that came from having tenure and nothing left to lose. "Gentlemen," she said, settling into a chair across from the 3 alien representatives with the casual authority of someone conducting a faculty meeting. And I use that term loosely, since the concept of gender requires individual identity, which my research suggests you don't technically possess. Tribune Vex Kalar felt his species' famous diplomatic training abandon him entirely. Dr. Vasquez, you stand accused of crimes against the natural order of— Coffee? Elena interrupted, gesturing toward a thermal carafe that had materialized from somewhere. It's Colombian, single origin. I realize most species consider individual taste preferences a meaningless concept, but I find the ritual of hospitality helps establish conversational frameworks. Harmonizer Dex Vool's pheromone output shifted to something resembling bewildered cinnamon. We didn't come here for refreshments. No, you came here because my research is dismantling the philosophical foundations of galactic civilization, and your respective governments are panicking. Elena took a leisurely sip of coffee. Would you like me to explain why, or shall we continue pretending this is about war crimes? Adjudicator Thresh9 Prime's crystalline form rang with harmonics that suggested structural stress. Your experiments have caused 3 separate species to question their most basic assumptions about existence. 4 species, Elena corrected. The harmonizers are having their own crisis, though they're expressing it through increasingly confused scent patterns rather than formal philosophy. Dex Vool here has been releasing existentially troubled lavender for the past 20 minutes. Dex Vool's pheromone cloud immediately shifted to something that smelled distinctly like embarrassed mint. You see? Elena smiled with the satisfaction of someone proving a particularly elegant theorem. Involuntary chemical communication that reveals internal states without individual conscious control. Your species shares emotional experiences automatically. The concept of privacy, of having thoughts that belong exclusively to one individual, is literally incomprehensible to you. This is precisely the problem, Vex Kalar interjected. Your research suggests that fundamental aspects of galactic society are imaginary, Elena suggested helpfully. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Free will, individual responsibility, personal achievement, private property, romantic love, artistic expression, all uniquely human concepts that require believing you exist as a separate entity from everyone else. Thresh9 Prime's harmonic frequency approached something like crystalline despair. But galactic law is based on individual accountability. Which explains why it's such a mess, Elena replied cheerfully. You're trying to apply human legal concepts to species that don't experience individual identity. It's like legislating the color blue for creatures that only see in thermal spectrums. She pulled up a holographic display showing complex mathematical models that hurt to look at directly. Consider the Zeph-Hi collective. Beautiful species, excellent at resource management, absolutely brilliant at consensus building. But you insist on treating them as billions of individuals rather than one distributed consciousness. Then you wonder why they find democracy incomprehensible. The Zeph-Hi vote in elections, Vex Kalar protested. The Zeph-Hi perform voting because you told them democratic participation was required for galactic citizenship. They experience it as a bizarre ritual where they pretend to disagree with themselves, then count the disagreements and act surprised by the results. Dex Vool's scent pattern shifted to something like horrified realization with notes of bergamot. You're saying we've been forcing incompatible cognitive frameworks on species that never evolved individual consciousness, he said. Worse, I'm saying humans exported our psychological aberrations as universal constants, then built galactic civilization around concepts that only make sense if you're suffering from chronic individual identity delusion. Elena brought up another display showing comparative brain scans across species. Look at the neural architecture. Humans have massively overdeveloped prefrontal cortexes relative to our social processing centers. We literally evolved to think of ourselves as separate from our communities. Most species evolved the opposite pattern: enhanced collective processing, minimal individual identity formation. This is catastrophic, Thresh 9 Prime managed. Oh, it gets better. Human concepts like personal responsibility have been causing psychological trauma in species that experience shared decision-making. The Veltar Syndicate has been trying to understand individual blame for 3 centuries. Half their population is in therapy. Vex Kalar stared at the data with growing horror. You're destroying the conceptual framework of interstellar civilization. I'm revealing that it was already broken, badly broken. The only reason galactic society functions at all is because most species are too polite to mention that human-derived legal and social concepts make no sense to them. Elena stood and walked to a window overlooking the research station's docking bay, where the tribunal ship waited with ominous patience. The real question, she continued, is what we do with this information. Do we pretend individual consciousness is universal and keep forcing square psychological pegs into round species holes? Or do we acknowledge that humans are cognitive outliers and rebuild galactic society around frameworks that actually work for everyone else? You're suggesting we restructure everything, Dex Vul said, his scent carrying undertones of terrified possibility. I'm suggesting we stop pretending that human psychology is the template for sapient consciousness. Most species would be happier and more functional if we stopped insisting they behave like defective humans. Thresh 9 Prime's harmonic patterns approached something like revelation mixed with panic. But what about humans? If individual identity is your species' primary cognitive adaptation, we keep doing what we've always done, existing as impossible individuals in a universe that should logically prevent us from functioning. Elena turned back to face the tribunal, with a grin that managed to be both reassuring and terrifying. The difference is we stop assuming everyone else works the same way. The room fell silent, except for Dex Vul's involuntary release of what smelled like contemplative eucalyptus. There's one more thing, Elena added casually. My research has been peer-reviewed by the Galactic Academic Consortium, published in 17 major journals, translated into 437 languages, and distributed through every university network in known space. The tribunal absorbed this information with expressions that transcended species boundaries in their shared horror. You've already released everything, Vex Kalar said slowly. 3 weeks ago. Tenure has its privileges, including the right to publish research without prior governmental approval. Elena's smile could have powered small suns. Your arrival was never about stopping me. It was about damage control. The 3 aliens sat in stunned silence, processing the realization that they were already too late. The terms Elena proposed were elegantly simple and utterly devastating. She wanted exactly one thing: a formal academic peer review of her consciousness research, conducted according to proper scientific methodology, with full transparency and published results. That's it? Tribune Vex Kalar asked, his diplomatic training screaming warnings about proposals that sounded too reasonable. Academic review? Standard procedure for paradigm-shifting research, Elena replied, refilling her coffee cup with the practiced ease of someone who understood that caffeine was essential for negotiations involving the restructuring of galactic civilization. Though I should mention that proper peer review requires representative samples from all major sapient species. Harmonizer Dex Vul's pheromone output suggested suspicious vanilla with undertones of impending catastrophe. Representative samples of what, exactly? Consciousness itself, direct neural interface studies, behavioral analysis, decision-making pattern mapping, the usual methodology for comparative psychology research. Adjudicator, Thresh 9 Prime's crystalline form produced sounds that the universal translator struggled to interpret but generally conveyed harmonic panic in B-flat minor. You want to study our thought processes directly? How else would we verify whether individual identity exists across species? The scientific method requires empirical data, not philosophical speculation. Elena pulled up a new holographic display showing proposed experimental protocols that made the tribunal's previous horror seem quaint by comparison. Phase 1 involves basic consciousness mapping, determining whether each species experiences unified or distributed awareness. Phase 2 tests decision-making independence versus collective processing. Phase 3 examines memory formation and personal narrative construction. You're proposing to dissect the fundamental nature of sapient thought, Vex Kalar said slowly. I'm proposing to understand it. There's a difference, though I realize species without individual scientific curiosity might find the distinction subtle. The casual brutality of the observation hung in the air like a perfectly calculated insult wrapped in academic courtesy. And if we refuse? Thresh 9 Prime asked. Elena shrugged with the magnificent indifference that only tenured professors could achieve. Then my published research stands unchallenged, and galactic society continues operating under demonstrably false assumptions about consciousness until the psychological contradictions cause complete civilizational collapse. You're blackmailing the entire galaxy. Dex Vull's sent words carried notes of awed terror with hints of grudging admiration. I'm offering collaborative research opportunities. The blackmail interpretation requires believing I have individual agency and personal motivations, which according to your species' worldview should be impossible. The tribunal sat in silence, while Elena's logic carved through their assumptions like a precision instrument designed specifically for philosophical surgery. There's another option, Vex Kalar said finally. We arrest you and suppress your research. Certainly, though that would require proving individual culpability for research conducted by a distributed academic network spanning 14 institutions across 9 star systems. Elena's smile carried the particular satisfaction of someone who had anticipated every possible counter-move. Good luck establishing criminal responsibility for collaborative scientific inquiry involving species that don't experience individual identity. She gestured toward her holographic displays with casual authority. Besides, the research data is already integrated into every major university database. Suppressing it would require convincing thousands of academics across hundreds of species to simultaneously decide that empirical evidence should be ignored in favor of comfortable assumptions. Academics, Thresh 9 Prime said the word like a curse in 17 different harmonic frequencies. Academics, Elena agreed cheerfully. The one group guaranteed to prioritize intellectual curiosity over social stability. By now, research teams across the galaxy are designing their own consciousness studies. The question isn't whether this research continues, it's whether it's conducted with proper scientific rigor or becomes a chaotic free-for-all of competing methodologies. The tribunal absorbed this with the dawning realization that they were negotiating from a position of complete intellectual surrender. What exactly would proper peer review accomplish? Vex Kalar asked. Best case scenario? We discover I'm wrong. Individual consciousness is universal, and galactic society continues operating under its current assumptions with minor adjustments. And worst case? Elena's grin could have been classified as a weapon under galactic conventions governing psychological warfare. We prove that humans are cognitive aberrants whose exported delusions have been causing species-wide identity crises for 3 millennia, then spend the next several centuries rebuilding interstellar civilization around frameworks that actually make sense for collective consciousness species. That's the worst case? Dex Vull's pheromone output suggested mint-flavored existential vertigo. For established power structures, yes. For actual sapient flourishing, It might be the best thing that ever happened to galactic civilization. The room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of Elena's coffee equipment, automatically preparing another batch, and Thresh 9's crystalline form, producing frequencies that sounded distinctly like resigned acceptance in a minor key. "You planned this entire scenario," Vex Kalar said finally. "The coffee ritual, the timing, the theatrical arrival ultimatum. I calculated probable responses to paradigm-threatening research and prepared accordingly, though calling it planning assumes individual strategic thinking, which contradicts your species' fundamental assumptions about collective decision-making processes." Elena stood and walked to her laboratory window, looking out at the stars with the expression of someone who had just successfully redefined the nature of existence while maintaining perfect academic decorum. "The beautiful irony," she continued, "is that this entire conversation demonstrates exactly what my research predicted. 3 representatives of collective consciousness species trying to make individual decisions about research that proves individual decisions are psychologically impossible for your cognitive architecture." The tribunal sat in stunned recognition of their own logical trap. "So," Elena said, turning back to face them with coffee cup raised in a gesture that might have been toast or challenge, "shall we schedule the peer review? I'm particularly interested in your species' perspectives on whether the self is a useful fiction or a cosmic accident." Outside the window, stars continued their ancient dance, completely indifferent to the fact that one small human with an oversized coffee apparatus had just negotiated the philosophical restructuring of galactic civilization by the simple expedient of insisting that everyone else's approach to consciousness made perfect sense, which, as any properly tenured professor could tell you, was the most devastating academic critique possible.